If we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe.
Welcome everyone. That's going to be the best YouTube video, not only in my channel, but also on YouTube platform. I'm so much happy to have this team today with Professor Guy McPherson, Kevin Hester, Jim Massa, and John Doyle together. And we will speak without any plan, whatever comes with climate emergency or anything going on in our planet, so many things going on. Let's see what comes up. But first of all, I want to say something here. All of us are from different places in the planet. Guy McPherson, you're in where exactly?
I'm in Vermont, in what is typically called New England in the United States, the northeastern United States.
Perfect. I'm in the Netherlands, waiting for flood to take me. And John Doyle, you're in Belgium?
Yeah, in Brussels, Ixelles to be precise, the commune of Ixelles, a nice leafy little commune with parks and pleasant folks.
Perfect. Kevin Hester, you're from New Zealand?
Kino Island and the Hauraki Gulf, Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Wow.
It's a small country off the coast of Australia.
And also it's another day in your side, so you're one day ahead us. Amazing. Mm-hmm. And Jim Massa is from British Columbia, is that true, or?
I live outside Fairbanks, Alaska, via northern New Hampshire, next door neighbors of Vermont. So kind of shared a similar background there with where Guy is.
We are distributed around the planet and we've got different backgrounds, but what connects us is love of our planet within us. But also, yeah, I think we've got one thing common in this group. We cannot tell lies, we cannot give false hopes. And all of us, I think, in this team have got similar experiences which made this team together today. We spoke always truth for the love of our planet only, not for aiming career, not for aiming money as return, but just to speak the ethical truth for our responsibility for the planet that we live in. Sometimes it costed us a lot. Sometimes it costed us even relationships, even careers at some points. It costed a lot. I think in this group, all of us have this common experience which connects us today. And we will continue this way because we know that even though it's small, there is a community who can understand us and who appreciate to hear the truth from us. That's why we still continue, even though in times it's difficult for us as well. And but in the way, we also meet with other people who appreciate hearing good information from us. And I even met my boyfriend in this journey who also appreciated the truth. And sometimes it doesn't cost only losing things, but sometimes joining new people who can understand and appreciate the truth with us. So today we will continue. Where shall we start, everyone? We've got climate emergency going on. We've got war in Europe going on. We've got food security issues going on. We've got Arctic suddenly melting faster than expected some reason. I don't know. I don't find it faster than expected. I expected it even faster, but yeah, that's the common term. Where shall we start with?
Jim, why don't you kick us off with what's unfolding in the Arctic around you at the moment?
Well, this winter has been kind of well, for interior Alaska, it's been kind of a snotty one. We've had huge amounts of snow, not record-breaking, but definitely in the top 3 for total accumulated amounts. And I ascribe part of that to the fact that the Arctic Ocean stayed open longer, didn't quite freeze up. So that allowed moisture to make its way into the atmosphere, which then made its way onto the ground. And then the ice did form up later on. And now we're actually seeing some pretty thick ice, at least in the southern Chukchi. The Bering Sea ice is a little on the thin side. Then we saw some late ice forming on the Eurasian side of the Arctic, but it did pretty much freeze over. And now we're seeing what I call the bipolar polar region, because you have on one side is extremely warm and the other side is cooler than what the average would be. When you look at the Eurasian side, they're running quite warm, some 10 to 20 C above average, which is astonishing. And but around over Alaska to Yukon, it actually was a cooler than average winter as far as temperatures are concerned. So then Beril started off with the things are happening faster than most people expected. Well, that is if you subscribe to the IPCC's linear approach, and we all know that that is incorrect, that things are indeed exponentiating. And if you fit the data to the exponential models, it tells you that this is what will be happening. This is one of the reasons why I tend to look at the publications from PIK out of Potsdam, Germany. They use models that the IPCC does not use. They use a different set of models, one that they've continually to refine and improve upon for the past 30 plus years or so. I think it's, memory serves, it's an acronym, but it's called CLIMBER, is the program that they use. And they have been quite accurate in what their projections are. And that includes looking at the situation here in the Arctic.
One of the reasons why I wanted to bring up the Arctic at the get-go was I watched a presentation where Nick Breeze interviewed Jason Box, who's a famous glaciologist, and Nick has interviewed Guy before over the years. But there was a quote from Jason Box, quote, "The whole Arctic is losing 10,000 cubic tons of ice per second." That was published in November 2021. I went back this morning to double check that that hasn't been altered or edited or removed, and it hasn't. It's so incredibly difficult to get your head around that kind of ice loss and that sort of time frame. But I think that's because we all underestimate how big the Arctic is.
Yeah, I am familiar with Jason Box. I don't consider him, I don't consider him to be hyperbolic. Basically, what he says is spot on or very close. So he's not exaggerating. So if he's presenting these findings, take him at it, accept his findings as being accurate based on his work. And I think he does good work. It is alarming. And what has to be considered next is, so you have this melting taking place. What happens to that fresh water? Does the fresh water find its way into the North Atlantic, or does it somehow, because the way some of the currents are going, does it find itself entrained within the Arctic Ocean? Depending on what the situation is, if it finds its way into the North Atlantic, that will, of course, impact what we're already seeing with AMOC, with the slowdown and so forth. But if it entrains itself into the Arctic Ocean, and that depends on what the Arctic dipole is doing, what the air pressure system is doing, how they're governing the wind stress and the currents, etc. If the fresh water gets entrained in the Arctic Ocean, that then affects the halocline. So now you're starting to put this fresher layer of water, this freshwater lens on the surface, and that's going to affect the halocline in conjunction with the warmer waters moving into the Arctic Ocean, the source being the North Atlantic intermediate water, which ultimately arises or comes out of the Mediterranean. So then you have this warm, saltier water, which is more dense, so it's at intermediate depths. Then how does this all impact the halocline? And we're seeing some really interesting results that the halocline, depending on the season, can get shallower or deeper and so on. But then that in turn impacts productivity. You know, what did the phytoplankton do, the zooplankton, and so forth. It's extremely dynamic. And then you couple that with the continual, what's being called the Atlantification of the Arctic Ocean basin. And it's coming in from the Fram Strait side, and it's progressing all along the Eurasian side. So we've already had the Atlantification of the Barents. It's now moving into the Kara and Laptev seas as well. So you have all these physical dynamics, the freshwater lens, the warm water moving into the Arctic Ocean, affecting the halocline, which then in turn affects what's called Ekman pumping, you know, the vertical movement of the water. And is the halocline, is fish sufficiently strong enough to inhibit mixing, or is it weakened so that mixing is enhanced and you can get nutrients into the photic zone? These are all open areas of research right now. And, you know, when you look at the results, it seems to be all over the place, but hey, it's a dynamical system. But there are definitely changes taking place within the Arctic Ocean, and this impacts the entire planet.
Dear Guy McPherson, would you like to tell about the impact of losing fresh water and all the tipping points that we discussed on the land and our food security, water security issues?
Well, I think the most important existential threat we face is loss of Arctic ice. And that can be coming very soon, contrary to what you read in the peer-reviewed literature. The people who actually produce the peer-reviewed literature are not publishing this information, but they're letting it out in interviews. For example, James Anderson, the atmospheric scientist at Harvard, who famously linked chlorofluorocarbons in the hole in the Antarctic. He said in an interview with Forbes magazine in January of 2018 that we will have an ice-free Arctic Ocean next year, with full effects being realized the following year. Jennifer McKinnon, when she was interviewed by CBS News in April 2021, indicated that probably we'll have an ice-free Arctic Ocean this year. Perhaps it'll be next year. But if we look at the best case scenario of those two well-informed individuals, then that indicates that we can expect an ice-free Arctic next year with full effects, meaning loss of albedo and release of even more methane and so on in 2024, which is not long from now. There, you know, as everybody here knows, there are dozens of so-called tipping points, self-reinforcing feedback loops that we can talk about involving freshwater, land systems, overheating in general. What relatively few people know is that the Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases, which was the predecessor to the IPCC, indicated that 1 degree C was the absolute upper limit, that was the point at which things would start falling apart. And they started falling apart before then. In fact, David Spratt, science writer and speaker about climate change, says we triggered those self-reinforcing feedback loops at a 0.5 degree C above the 1750 baseline. So we're already dealing with, quote, runaway climate change with respect to those self-reinforcing feedback loops and the inability to turn back the clock. Finally, the IPCC acknowledged that we were in the midst of abrupt and irreversible climate change with 2 separate reports, 3 and 4 years ago. And yet nobody seems to be paying much attention to that information. When the IPCC, perhaps the most conservative scientific body in the history of the planet, when they conclude that we're in the midst of abrupt climate change and irreversible climate change, that should be on the news every day, really. And instead, we just see celebrity blah, blah, blah on the news every day. At least the last time I looked at the news 30 or 40 years ago, that was the case.
Always we need distraction from the main issue.
Right.
Right now in the Netherlands, we cannot buy 2 sunflower oil. We need coupon. We can get only 1 sunflower oil in a day. And also the shelves are empty. I mean, if you find, then if you got coupon, you can get 1 sunflower oil with extreme high price. That's only one thing suddenly changed. But yeah, food security issue is so real. I hope people realize how things are connected. I mean, if we lose bees, if we lose the soil density, and if we lose fresh waters, these are such connected. And I hope we start connecting the dots and to realize that we are part of the nature where the bees are from as well. Is it the same, John Doyle, in Belgium, or is it only the Netherlands?
I have a frog in my throat, so I muted myself, much to everybody's delight, I've no doubt. It's an interesting one. I was just following on from what Jim and Guy said about tipping points. And I would like the whole world to take a look at a video by a wonderful lady called Sabine Hossenfelder. Sabine is a German experimental physicist, and she does these little videos, kind of 10-minute videos, where she looks specifically at aspects of modern experimental physics. Her YouTube channel is called Science Without the Gobbledygook. She's absolutely brilliant. She's a brilliant physicist, and I've seen her roast a couple of people. And but what the one I'm thinking of in particular, she does a presentation on tipping points. Like what we mean in physics when we talk about tipping points. And I'm very interested in it because something came up. I did a video probably about this time last week with a wonderful Irish chap called James Desmond, and there was a bunch of other people there, and it was a lot of fun. Paul Beckwith was there. There was this chap who was talking about cloud brightening, pumping saline solutions to brighten clouds, which is fine, and everybody gets to talk about what they want to talk about. But I was really interested in that. I tried to make the point that the use of tipping points mean, what a tipping point essentially means is that in physics terms, is that the state you are in was path dependent. How you got there mattered. Okay, so the example that Sabine uses and I always use is tempering chocolate. Like you get chocolate and you have to just get it just right, and then you can make it. It's lovely and shiny. Now, after chocolate goes off, as we say, it doesn't actually go off at all, but the crystalline substructure, if you like, changes, and you get kind of this white marbling, and people say, "Ooh, the chocolate's off." Now, and you can't get it back. There's nothing you can't heat it up and get it back again, right? So because it is a path dependent thing, it hits a tipping point and it goes somewhere else. And I think that's something that a lot of people haven't understood, that when we talk about tipping points, it's not that, oh, all the Arctic ice will go, so it's going to be really, really hard to reverse the process. All the Arctic ice goes and never comes back in the way it has. I mean, maybe in 8 gazillion years, there'll be ice to the west and to the east. And you hear people say this all the time, we really need to stop emitting or whatever, reversing things, so that those glaciers that have been retreating can start climbing back up the mountains again. They're tipping points. They're path dependent. It doesn't happen that way.
Amount is mentioned by Kevin earlier. That's a huge amount of freshwater loss. By you mentioned this, I would like to ask a question to everyone in this group. I will ask your answers one by one. So we are full speed going to Blue Ocean event, losing the Arctic. Does anyone in the group thinks that we can just push the brake of this car, full speed car, and stop it? Or do you see that we already lost the Arctic, but the rest is just matter of time? Guy McPherson, would you like to start?
I would hate to start, so yes, I'll go first. I think it's too late. And if it's not too late from a physical perspective, I think it's too late from a social perspective. I'm reminded of a line from John Kenneth Galbraith, the Canadian-American economist, diplomat, public official, public intellectual. He said, people of privilege will always risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage. That's people of privilege. That's what they would do. And if that's what we need to kickstart and then fully implement the mere reflection framework, for example, then it's never going to happen, because those people are not interested in giving up any material part of their advantage. They just are not going to do it. So it doesn't really matter what the five of us think, does it? What really matters is the people who have the means to implement those kind of large scale projects, like, for example, World War III. And they seem to be pointed in the opposite direction of what the majority of the populace would like them to point. I think that's terrible.
Thank you so much. Kevin, Hester, what do you think? Did we already lose the Arctic and the rest is just matter of time, or there's a break point option to stop the car approaching to this end?
I don't think we have any agency whatsoever in influencing how this situation will evolve. We're so far off the cliff. We're multiple decades beyond being able to do that. But we do have agency on how we behave between now and collapse. Are we going to tell the truth to the youth, or are we going to bullshit them at the edge of extinction? I won't have a bar of that, and I won't have a bar of anyone who's going down that road. And just one last thing about the Arctic sea ice is that there's a wonderful paper published by Scripps Institute of Oceania, and they said that a blue ocean event is equivalent, the loss of albedo from a blue ocean event will be the equivalent of 25 years of current emissions. The last 25 years is more than all the previous anthropogenic influences. This is how far off the cliff we have gone. Over to you, John.
Jim Massa, what do you think? What's your opinion? The same question. Do you think we lost it already, or is there an option to break?
Well, I agree with Guy and Kevin. It is too late. Even when exactly the BOE happens, it's still what's leading up to it. We are having an earlier melting of whatever sea ice is there because of the continual heat input from not just the Atlantic side, but also the Pacific side. Is that this heat is diffusing, keeping the waters open longer. So we now have the seasonality of when there's minimal ice is extending. It's now up to 7 months of the year. And so this continual heat diffusion from below not only melts the ice early in the year, but prevents it from freezing later in the year. So now you have this extended open water time period that's more albedo that's lost or not. So you have more absorption of heat energy. We are also losing the multi-year ice, the thick ice. The ice volume is drastically dropping. That is another key consideration that needs to be mentioned. So you take all these things together, and the Arctic will soon become a region that we can no longer recognize as being Arctic in nature. we'll have to maybe call it something else. But the typical characteristics that define the Arctic is basically being tossed aside. It's just drastically changing. One thing I want to mention about tipping points and so forth, a paper published by PIK came out last year, and this paper was a very thorough examination of interactions among various tipping elements. So it wasn't so much of, oh, what happens if AMOC shuts down? What happens, with the Amazon? What happened? But they tried to synthesize all the possible interactions. Do the interactions augment or mitigate what is happening? Very extensive papers, the first of its kind to attempt this study and put it together. And the overall finding, to me, was extremely telling. Basically, what they came down, their conclusions, as you will, was that an increase of 1.3 C is enough to cause a catastrophic, all shits hit the fan, basically, at which point there is no reversibility. Well, if you go by the IPCC saying that we're at 1.2, and that, of course, they keep changing the baseline, they keep moving the goalposts around, so that, to me, it's invalid. If you go back to 1750 baseline, it should be, well, we've kind of already gone past the 1.3. And so this, again, goes to the point that Guy had made earlier, which is that it's too late and think we're already in a climate collapse. And this study was, I found to be very telling. And it's the first of its kind, but people need to look at this paper and carefully take away the information that they're conveying, because it's very stark.
If I can get the paper name, I will put it into description. Dear Guy McPherson, would you like to say anything about the shift of the baseline in this point?
Oh, it's the favorite trick, right? Favorite trick with the IPCC and a lot of other people as well. We just keep moving around. But Professor Andrew Glickson in Australia indicated in his October 2020 book, The Event Horizon, that we already are beyond 2 watts per square meter, which means we're already beyond 2 degrees C above the 1750 baseline. So for people who don't play that game, who don't lie by shifting the baseline, we're already done, and it didn't take 2C. 2C never mattered, as we've known since October of 1985, when the Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases indicated that 1 degree C is really the upper limit. And then beyond that, we've discovered that we've triggered a whole bunch of self-reinforcing feedback loops, a bunch of tipping points, even before that 1 degree C came along. And yet people are still trying to hide it.
Dear John, before we finish the round, would you like to give your answer too? Do you think we lost the Arctic, or do you think there's a way to press the break button? Just a very short answer. Then I will make another question round.
Okay, no. 100% lost it, and but that's yeah. I've something else I'd like to introduce at some stage during the conversation, but yeah. But keep going, and I'll get it in later. If anyone feels they need to listen to a rant for about 10 minutes, just press the button. I'll do it.
To give my opinion, I believe that we lost it, and
Yep.
I had a bet with Frank that for €100. I say Blue Ocean is this year. If I win, he will give me €100, and I will buy a sugar spin. I will make a YouTube video eating my sugar spin. Otherwise, next year I will be giving him €100. Let's see who wins.
Well, that assumes that there are no supply disruptions, so you're able to get your sugar spin.
Yes, that's nice to find a sugar spin. Indeed. To think about supply resources, dear Guy McPherson, you mentioned, and my question was about that actually. I see now a lot of YouTube videos, especially the preppers, mentioning the difference of our current situation about supply, food security, and the similarities to it to Great Depression time, especially in United States. And that time there were heat waves and loss of a lot of agricultural products as well. People didn't have money or resources. They compare how they dealt with the issues. And how do you see the differences of Great Depression time and the times right now and coming ahead? What are the similarities and differences in your point of view?
Well, in the case of the Great Depression, the late 1920s, early 1930s, it was strictly an error from a policy perspective. So economists were doing the wrong thing. They weren't stimulating the economy by pumping a bunch more fiat currency into it, which obviously we're capable of doing now. And man, have we been doing that for a long time. When Ben Bernanke was chair of the Federal Reserve System, which was many years ago, they called him Helicopter Ben because he once mentioned that he would love to go up into a helicopter if things got too bad and start kicking out bales of fiat currency. So it's bad. It's bad right now. Every time we go to the grocery store, we notice there's something else missing. There's entire shelves that are empty. That was the case during the pandemic when it was at its height. I'm not suggesting that the pandemic is over by any stretch of the imagination, but now it seems to bounce around. It's not just toilet paper. It's not just dairy products. It's bread one week and the next week it's sugar. And be careful of that one, Beryl, because it could be sugar coming your way someday. And then the next week it's something completely different. So it seems to be bouncing around which of these supplies are being restricted and not being delivered at the same scale they were before into the grocery stores. So when we go to the grocery store, we never know. We have these things on our list, but there's no guarantee, unlike there was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years, basically all the way back to the Great Depression. There's at least a 99% chance when you go to the grocery stores in the United States that everything you want is going to be there. It's been the case since at least World War II. And now, there's no guarantees.
Exactly. Dear Kevin, how do you see the differences and similarities between Great Depression and our times and the times coming ahead?
Life in those days was much more simple. A lot of people were producing their own food. A lot of people were making their own clothing. One of the problems with this civilization is complexity. It's way more complex now than it was 10 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 100 years ago. If you ever look at the collapse of all the other previous civilizations, a whole lot of those things are happening as we are going through our own collapse. One of them was complexity. One of them was military overshoot. One of them was dysfunctional, sociopathic and psychopathic leaders. Have a look around the planet with what we've got. I think this is just going to be so much more intense, and as a result, it will be faster. The New Zealand government just recently made this catastrophically bad decision. We have only one oil refinery in this country where we actually can refine oil. Because we can get people in the Middle East to do it cheaper than we can do it, the government in New Zealand is closing our one and only oil refinery. If war breaks out in the Pacific between America and China, which is an extraordinarily high possibility, John Pilger's made a documentary called The Coming War with China. When that war breaks out, we will be blockaded and society in New Zealand will collapse within a week. No fuel, no diesel, no trucks rolling, no food in the supermarket.
In a week.
It's not fucking rocket science.
Wow. Dear Jim Massa, how do you see the differences and similarities between Great Depression times and our times and the times coming ahead?
Well, a little bit out of my wheelhouse here, but yeah, we see this what the euphemism supply chain interruption problems, what have you, but it's the problem is that we have an economic system that favors the rich oligarchs, so that, you know, at least here in the U.S., wages have not kept pace with inflation. Wages have been basically stagnant for 4 decades at least, basically since the neoliberalism bullshit that we've been subjected to for the last 4 decades. And we're kind of seeing the fruition of those policies biting us in the ass big time. You know, people can hardly afford anything. I mean, here in the US, there's a housing issue, namely that housing costs have gone astronomically through the stratosphere. And so people cannot afford to even, you know, pay rent, let alone trying to, you know, put enough food on the table. You have a lot of people who took out massive student loans to try to get a BA, BS degree, and only to find that there's no jobs, you know, that those degrees, you know, would presumably give them. So then they're working, you know, for minimum wage jobs, which is shit wages. Not even, you know, I mean, if we were to have a minimum wage that would allow a person to work 40 hours a week and be able to have, you know, a somewhat comfortable life, be able to have a roof over the head, food, clothing, and that's so forth. We're really, at least here in the US, we're talking a minimum wage around $24 an hour. So this whole thing about 15, it still misses the mark. You still are not going to lift people out of poverty. You have here in the US, at least 50 to up to, I've seen different estimates, up to 80% of people are either living in poverty or literally a paycheck away from falling into poverty. How is this a sustainable system? It's not a sustainable system. It just is not. But yet you keep seeing the prices going up and up. You have people that they just can't afford anything.
Yeah.
And the policies, if you can call it that, from at least the American politicians here, do nothing to address these issues. They just kind of look the other way while they keep giving away subsidies and tax cuts to corporations and rich individuals who they don't need it.
Yeah. Yeah, Guy McPherson always said this, we are trying to sustain the unsustainable. So that reminds me of this. And eye-opening, great points, heartbreaking as well. John Doyle, last turn to you. And how do you see the differences, similarities to Great Depression and the coming times?
Well, I'm inclined to think of a Canadian academic I really love, a guy called Northrop Frye, who wrote the definitive study of William Blake. It's called Fearful Symmetry. And it's a brilliant, brilliant study. It's full of shocking moments of revelation. But somewhere early on, he sort of dismisses Eastern philosophy and sort of says, well, you know, I'm not looking at the, you know, the woo-woo stuff from the East. And I've realized myself over the last 2 or 3 years that the Eastern philosophies, whether you're looking Hindu, Buddhism, Taoism, are essentially what Freud, Adler, Assagioli, and others have brought to us under the guise of psychoanalysis. And I think that a big difference from the Great Depression will hopefully be that people are somewhat more exposed to the potential of you know, awakening different sorts of consciousness. Now, I don't mean anything woo-woo about that. It's, you know, any of us who've been through therapy know exactly. It's just a question of seeing it differently, feeling it differently, being in a different
Understanding
space.
that we are really part of this nature, and when nature, even the smallest element of the nature is impacted, it directly touches to us. Seeing our connection to Mother Nature. Some people say Gaia or whatever, spirit, whatever you call.
We're all, well, you know, as they say, it's, you know, it's, you're it, like tat Massa, you know, this is it, you're it. And therein, I'm kind of gently feeling my own way forward here. Like you, I'm vegan, for example. And I went vegan purely for climate reasons about 8-9 years ago, when my daughter kind of pointed out exactly why land use change was doing what it was. And but I only did it for you know, for the climate. And then I got a little bit more interested in the animals. And then recently I said, well, it's actually good for my health as well. You know, so I've become, and I've met with a guy that I think maybe the next time we do one of these, a person who has really impressed me, a guy called Salish Rao, SAILESH-RAO. He's a fascinating man because, first of all, he's he's an electronic engineer like me, but a way better one, with a serious pedigree and actually building shit like routers, for copper routers for Ethernet, and just amazing things. But back in 2004, he had this revelation that he was going to do something about climate change, and you know, I've met with him a couple of times recently, and I've been falling around the place laughing, sort of saying, yeah, man, this doesn't work. We are all going to die, you know. And it's very interesting.
But I still suggest to find ways of ethical living in times that we spend here on our
it's slightly different than that, because he has come up with something that I absolutely adore in its absolute quixotic stupidity. The 19th of November, which is the day after the next pointless COP will end. The plan is to feed every person on the planet, one whole food, plant-based meal, to show it's doable, that we can look after hunger, and to show that as humans, we only need this tiny little bit. Now, this seems impossible to me, but this is a very
great, but I don't see any possibility for that.
Me neither. But I'm going to do it anyway.
So
I'm going to do it anyway.
I will make a last question session. Okay. So we hear all the news for years now. I'm really bored hearing every day, faster than expected. I don't see any news which seem me faster than expected. That's what I expected eventually. And I'm curious, one by one, I will ask again, is there anything that you're surprised and you suddenly realize it's faster than you expected? I mean, in this team, I don't think you expected temperatures not to rise, CO2 not to rise, but is there anything which surprises you too? Dear Guy McPherson, if I start, make a turn. I'll come back, John, I'll make the turn again.
When asked how they could see the future, science fiction writers George Orwell, Ray Bradbury, and Aldous Huxley each gave the same answer. They all said that they aren't predicting the future, they were reporting on events that were currently underway. I can relate. That's exactly how I felt for the last decade or so. Of course, there are exceptions. Some things are happening faster than expected. For example, my complete removal, my complete deplatforming from a social and public life happened so fast, I couldn't even believe it myself. I was warned, and then 8 months later, I was completely deplatformed, and I couldn't believe it. Some days I still can't believe it. Some days I still think I'm going to go on tour again. I'm going to look people in the eye. I'm going to give them the facts. That's the only way to convince most people. But it's not ever going to happen. So some things are happening even faster than I expected. And things have been going really fast. You know, most people have difficulty understanding the exponential function. I've understood the exponential function as an ecologist for a very long time. And yet still, sometimes I'm caught off guard. And I suppose that's all of us, right? That every once in a while, there's something that comes up and we say, wow, I thought that'd be at least the day after tomorrow. It's already here.
Wow, amazing. Kevin, Hester, is there anything that you see it's faster than you expected?
I was in Berlin 1 week before the Berlin Wall fell down. My darling ex-wife took a picture of me pissing on the wall, and then a week later it fell down. And my claim to fame was I undermined the foundations of the Berlin Wall. But the point of this part of the story is that there was no hint in Berlin that East Germany was about to collapse, and by dint of that the war would cease to have any meaning. Within a few months of that, the Soviet Union collapsed. People don't understand how tenuous this is. This is a Jenga stack that we're discussing. All my life, it's getting more and more and more unstable. And boom, it fell down. I think people have to realize that this collapse is underway now, and we could wake up tomorrow morning to a completely new paradigm. I honestly believe that.
So, Jim Massa, is there anything that you see faster than expected?
Well, I also understand the exponential function, the exponentiation, but even just seeing the increase in exponentiation of the last few years has come as a bit of a surprise. And it's I now say that the exponentiation itself is exponentiating. Think of sort of like the third derivative, the jerk. We had the change in acceleration. And I think that's what we're seeing planet-wide now, is that the accelerating changes are itself accelerating, where it's basically out of control. And it's gone into places where, it's not going to be good for humans or for the planet, really. We are in the middle of the sixth mass extinction. Humans will probably end up going extinct some point this century. I think James Lovelock optimistically said that by 2070 or so, there'll be 2 billion people left on the planet, which, if you look at current level, that's what, a 75% reduction. That's, optimistic. Earth will persist. Humans go extinct. All the other species that go extinct. Earth, like with all the other mass extinction events that's happened in the prior history, Earth will continue. Evolution will proceed. Niches will be filled. New species arise for another 4 billion years or so, until the sun decides to, start swelling a wee bit. But it's what we have unleashed on the planet. Let's face it, we have done what? We have done this massive geoengineering experiment for the last 270 years or so. And you see a lot of, and I've seen some really scorchers of geoengineering ideas put forth. And it's like, do you really think we can undo 270 years of what we've done in 10 years, within a decade? You really think we can reverse that? The answer is, of course, no, you can't. And so the rapidity of the acceleration is what surprises me. And yeah, we can talk about, we understand positive feedback loops, exponential functions, but then we can understand that from an intellectual aspect. We can understand thermodynamic processes, physical processes. We can understand that from an intellectual scientific aspect, but then trying to get your mind around that as to what it means societal, to society and human civilization and the rest of the planet, that can be overwhelming. And that can lead a lot of people to go into state of depression. It just can.
Thank you,
So
Jim Massa. And John Doyle, the last answer from you. Is there anything that you see faster than you expected? A short
First
answer,
and foremost,
please.
it's taken us far too long to call this group the Bartlett Appreciation Society, because all of us who understand the exponential function obviously spend years studying the number 70 with that great old guy from Colorado. You know, he was the business. Another thing that's happening way slower than I would have expected is any sort of cognizance of what's happening amongst, you know, ordinary people. Like, you know, it's not so much what's happening faster. You know, that hasn't been really any surprise. What's stunning is how there is no progressive increase in understanding or awareness, and how the systems continue to put it mildly, be massively mendacious and keep the unfortunate, you know, peasants, as a mate of mine would say, in ignorance. Having said that, something I really didn't expect from me has been, over the last 2 years, some real shocks of awakening of a kind of, on a personal level. I have no idea whether they have the slightest impact on where we might be going, and I'm not particularly attached to that. You get this kind of Buddhist illusion here. I had a kind of a health scare recently. It turned out to be a total red herring, and apparently I'm fit as a fiddle and healthy as I could possibly be. And I was really surprised to find myself invigorated and incredibly happy, because I thought, I said, oh, okay, fuck it, if I'm out of here, it doesn't really matter. And I'm not particularly attached to life. It's a long story. My life is a little bit backwards, you know, started miserable, I'm getting happier, which is a bit bizarre. But I found myself kind of filled with joy recently, which I find quite inexplicable. And that definitely happened a lot faster than I expected. It just happens like that. You know, maybe I'm listening to too much Alan Watson, drinking too much Guinness. Don't know. But that's my contribution.
Thank you so much. Maybe the last I can say, it's happened to me faster than expected. I always wanted to speak to best scientists existed on this planet, and people who understand the Earth systems best in this planet. And I'm so much blessed. I never thought that that will even happen, but that happened, and that happened faster than even expected at my side. I'm in tears by saying this. I'm so much blessed. Thank you so much for joining me. And dear Jim Massa, thanks a lot for your time. Dear Kevin Hester, thanks a lot for joining. Dear John Doyle, thanks a lot joining. Dear Guy McPherson, for all your efforts to speak in your channel every week, every time, sharing the truth, even though it's hard for you. I know having a lot of comments, judgments who don't want to hear the truth. You changed my life so much, and I cannot thank you enough. I don't know how we can explain that speaking bad news changed the life so good, but maybe it's not about the bad news, it's about the truth that you speak with your heart, with love of this planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beril, and thank you for organizing this meeting for us today. I appreciate it.
I buy into all that, and we shouldn't make it the last one. Let's do it again. It's just fun.
Definitely.
See you next time, everyone.
See you, folks. Thank you so much.
Bye
Happy
for now.
Paddy's Day after.
Bye.
Good to see everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
If we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe. That's terrifying. If we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe. If we lose the Arctic, we lose the globe.